After this month's local elections, the big question on everyone's lips is this: has Labour done enough to form the next government? Well, you see, in order to answer that question, we have to separate it out into two further questions. See, if the question that you're asking is, will Sir Keir Starmer be our next Prime Minister? Well, the answer to that question is most likely he will. Currently Labour are polling anywhere between 15 and 20 points ahead of the Conservatives, and in the local elections they were 9 points ahead. So in all likelihood, Labour will absolutely end up the largest party and will therefore form the next government. However, if the question you're actually asking is, will Labour win an overall majority at the next election, that's where things get a little bit more complicated, because as I just mentioned, Labour were 9 points ahead of the Conservatives in these local elections. They got 35% of the vote. However, if you compare that to last year's local elections, Labour's vote share is actually unchanged. They also got 35% of the vote in 2022. The Conservative vote share this year went down by 4 points. So therefore, some have argued that Labour actually haven't been making the kind of gains that they need to be in order to show that they're on course to win in the general election next year. Having said that though, it's worth pointing out that in this set of local elections in 2023, places like London, Wales and Scotland were not voting, and obviously those areas tend to lean more towards Labour, so it is possible that if you include those numbers, the figures might actually have been higher and Labour may be making more progress than some people would have assumed from this set of results. But if we look at the places where Labour did quite well, actually it does show that they could be turning around their fortunes here. They won in places like Plymouth, places like Swindon, places like Medway. These are huge, huge victories for Labour. They really are, based on these results at least, making significant headway. They're now the largest party in local government. The first time this has happened since 2002, the Conservatives lost 1,000 council seats. 1,000. Right? That was the worst end of their projections. If they did any better than that, it would have been seen as a pretty good night for Sunak, but they got the worst end of their projections. 1,000 seats lost. It was pretty bad for them. And this has many Conservative MPs quite alarmed. They think Rishi Sunak's response to these local election results to basically say, yeah, it is what it is, but I'm getting on with delivering for the country. They think that response was a bit too blasé, and he didn't quite get the urgency of what was at stake for the party. You look at places like the Blue Wall seats in the south of England, those are places where the Conservatives did quite badly, and actually the Lib Dems were having something of a bit of a revival. They won in places like Stratford-on-Avon, which is Nadeem Zahawi's home turf, right? And he has obviously had his struggles over the last year or so. That's quite concerning. If you're someone like Dominic Raab, you're going to be terrified. Dominic Raab is in Esher and Walton. He only has a 2,000 seat majority. That is going to be prime target for the Lib Dems at the next election. Places like Mid-Devon, I mean, that is basically Tory country, right? Mid-Devon, Cornwall, places like that, that is Tory headquarters, right? And the Lib Dems are picking off places like that. Dacorum Council in Hertfordshire, the Lib Dems are able to take that back as well. So the Tories are actually pretty panicked about all of this, right? You have Labour making gains in places where they need to be making gains, the Lib Dems making gains on the Tories' home turf. So what does that mean for the Conservatives heading into this election? What does it mean for Rishi Sunak? He's pretty chill about it. He's just like, I'm delivering for the people. I'm only 6 months into my term. We've got a long way to go. Chill out, backbenchers, calm down. Let's focus and get on with the job. But you have Ed Davey coming along saying, Rishi is not going to be able to revive his party. It's over for him. Keir Starmer is on manoeuvres. And so right now for the Conservatives, it is a pretty unsettling time, and it appears that many Conservative backbenchers are now thinking that, you know, their time in government is going to be up next year. And we saw a preview of what a potential Tory leadership contest could look like at the, quote, National Conservatism Conference, which happened this week. You had people like Suella Braverman, Jacob Rees-Mogg, effectively making their pitches to be the next Tory leader after the next election with their very, very hard right views. It was quite something to watch. You had Danny Kruger talking about the normative family and what proper family should look like. It was quite alarming to watch, actually. And you're seeing this play out now, probably as a reaction to these local election results, and Rishi Sunak just saying, it's all going to be okay. So with all of that in mind now, what lessons can we glean from those local elections and take as we look towards the general election coming up next year? Lewis Goodall said something absolutely fascinating on the Newsagents podcast recently when he was talking about how commentators and pundits are viewing the upcoming election. Essentially, he said that people are seeing this as a 1997 style potential victory for Labour, whereby Keir Starmer will just swoop in with an overall majority, clear house, and just completely transform the country. Instead, he argues that we should see this election through the lens of either 1992 or 2010. Right, 1992, when John Major somehow managed to claw it back, despite Neil Kinnock and Labour being far ahead in the polls. John Major was able to win that overall majority, and he was able to govern for the next 5 years, albeit 6 months later, Black Wednesday happened, and then the economy crashed, and then that was basically it for the Tories until 2010. And in 2010, you had the Conservatives win the most number of seats, but just fall short of an overall majority, and so the Conservatives had to go into bed with the Lib Dems, that famous Rose Garden speech with Lick Clegg and David Cameron and that sort of thing. And so he thinks that actually what will happen is the 2024 election will be one of those two scenarios, which I think makes perfect sense, because you look at Labour's polling right now, they're not quite ahead enough to win an overall majority as things stand, only 9 points ahead in these local elections, with the caveats I mentioned earlier. So I think it's actually very likely we're going to see Labour win the most number of seats, 280, 290, maybe even 300. Conservatives are going to just absolutely be decimated. The Lib Dems, however, might see something of a revival, and they might want to join in some sort of coalition or confidence and supply deal with Labour. And then, of course, the wild card in all this is the SNP, because Nicola Sturgeon is no longer First Minister. Their polling numbers have completely collapsed, and so there's an opportunity for Labour to actually come in and capitalise on that, which would make their path to a majority a lot easier, because that's something where for the last couple of years we've been saying, if Labour can't do well in Scotland, how can they get to a majority? Well, SNP vote is collapsing. That provides one path for Labour to do well in that arena.